Welcome to Windows on the World. We've covered the issue of regeneration, the housing crisis, and all that's linked in with that, which is basically now just corporate looting, and local authorities are actually removing themselves from the equation. Things are getting quite serious up and down the country. This is a countrywide issue. Our previous shows include housing developers and Lambeth Council corruption, which is a great expose of what happens when councils go against public opinion and even ignore judicial review, which is very serious. We've also got social cleansing and housing crisis explained, UK housing crisis and regeneration exposed, BBC lies and Lambeth corruption, and housing and local amenities sold out by councils, which ties in to what we're going to be talking about today. We covered the closure of the Alton Activity Centre in southwest London. Now the Alton estate is up for regeneration, which, as you may know by now, we have covered in quite some depth. I'm with Robin Bishop from Alton Regeneration Watch. So Robin, welcome to Windows on the World.
Welcome, Mark, and thanks very much for having me this afternoon.
Well, it's great that you've come on, and we've been discussing in quite a lot of detail the ins and outs of this, which goes into things like the infrastructure bill, the Housing and Planning Act, which has just come out. I think these are things that have been sneaked in on the back of of the pantomime that's going on in British politics at the moment. But these are very serious issues, and they affect everyone up and down the country. And it's to do with the demolition of social housing and the redeveloping of pretty much all areas in London by corporates. And we've even got people like Savills now writing policy. And we've talked, as I said earlier, in great depth about this. Now, you've been involved in the Alton Regeneration Watch for quite some time, and you know a lot of the background of how this has taken hold. So I think we should go into it briefly about how you've seen this corporate takeover really. Basically, they've ring-fenced everything, and it's very, very difficult now for anybody to have any input into what's happening locally. So give us a bit of a background, if you can, of how all this kind of started to go out of the public grasp, really.
Right, it's been quite a long story, Mark, but I'll cut it down as quickly as possible. The Alton estate is divided into two, east and west, and both parts were constructed in the late 1950s. The east, according to Swedish social model of housing at the time, and the west following Le Corbusier's themes. The estate, both parts of it, contains many iconic grade 2 and 2-star listed buildings from that 1950s construction, plus listed buildings from the Georgian era. And the unique feature of the estate as a whole is that it is a layer of Georgian landscaping and Georgian fine houses, along with the finest of mid-20th century modernist architecture. And the estate has won many plaudits in the architectural and in the social housing world for its construction and the nature of the careful design which London County Council brought to it. Unfortunately, since the balmy days of the late 1950s, as you know, and as probably your viewers will know, things have changed drastically, and probably the late 1970s would see the decline of areas such as our Alton estate, but also many other estates of social housing across London and also England and probably the whole of the United Kingdom, so that we've got to the stage now in the 21st century whereby these estates are depicted almost universally across the media as problems. You referred and used the word crisis in your introduction, and that's just what we're facing. The only problem is for us in the Alton estate is that the crisis depends very much in its nature on whom you ask. For us, the crisis is that out of our 3,300 homes on the estate, 330 are scheduled to be demolished in 2018 to be replaced by a greater number of buildings in order that the developer, which our local authority, Wandsworth Borough Council, plans to bring on board, and in order to make the development profitable, these developers will be able to sell the incremental number of housing units constructed on the open market at prices that will almost certainly be far more than people currently living on the estate will be able to pay.
That's one of the main issues that we've been bringing up, that they talk about affordable housing, but affordable to whom? This is the question that we've been asking, and it seems to be that it's basically property developers are selling to foreign investors, and they're just using them as safety deposit boxes really a lot of the time. That's what's happening with a lot of these new flats. So they're talking about density. This is this high density housing. Now, if this is high density housing that was where traditional social housing has been, then that should really be still considered for those people who are in social housing. But what we're talking about is social cleansing. So those people are going to get thrown out of there, and they will not be able to afford the affordable housing. You mentioned that there are many people who are leaseholders, maybe long-term leaseholders, who bought the flats. So can you tell us a bit how it affects them?
As regards leaseholders, Mark, the issue is that currently a 3-bedroom flat on the Alton estate sells for typically £320,000–330,000. However, a building which used to be a mental health care facility, which was one of the many facilities closed by Wandsworth Borough Council, was re-demolished and turned into a series of flats, or a big apartment block, a couple of years ago. The developer's brochure price for a 3-bedroom flat in this development, which is right on the very edge of the demolition area, is £505,000. So in other words, the promise that the council has made to rehouse all leaseholders in the demolition zone means that they will be moved from a building worth £330,000 to one worth in excess of £500,000. Most leaseholders, I would imagine, in the demolition area are not rich people and will not be able immediately to lay their hands on 200,000 extra pounds, nor will many of them be in a position to get a mortgage for the extra money. Wandsworth Borough Council has therefore promised that any shortfall in funding to buy a new flat in the new developments will be met by themselves, Wandsworth Borough Council. However, that means that somebody who currently owns their leasehold will end up with maybe 60% of it after this transition. And they will not only have lost total control over their leasehold during their lifetime, but say they wish to pass their leasehold on to children at the time of the death, they will be probably fairly unlikely to do so, because the council will, at the time of their death, or indeed they're selling the apartment beforehand, be looking to recoup their original equity investment, plus its appreciation in value during the time that the leasehold has been there. So it's really quite unlikely that, say, you die and your child, who is not much richer than yourself, wants to move into your leasehold that you have bequeathed them. They're more than likely going to have to sell it in order to pay Wandsworth Borough Council back their 40% of the equity.
Yeah, well, we're talking here really about a way of removing property rights.
Yes.
If you look in the bigger picture, what this is about is it's impoverishing people for the future. For instance, people who are moving into these areas with these vastly inflated house prices, for instance, say that the traditional Victorian semi, which is the outer London boroughs are full of, those 2 up, 2 downs. Now, those would be a traditional home for a first-time buyer, not, go back 10, 20 years, and affordable.
Yes.
So what we're doing is we're moving people into smaller places, and they're having less and less property rights. And of course, once property developers take over these places, the terms of the leases and the management fees that they're going to impose can be used to take the property. Now, this is something I've covered quite a lot, and it all seems to be going in that direction. So basically, we're talking about the removal of rights. Now, are people aware that that's what it's about, really?
A few are, but it's a very hard message to din home. But we are working hard on it, the Alton Regeneration Watch. The fact is, though, that in the demolition zone, 2/3, we estimate, of the households are social tenants, that is to say, council tenants. And the council has given the assurance that they will be rehoused in a similar flat in the same area at the same rent, and they will enjoy the same tenure rights. How much the last of those is worth in light of the current Housing and Planning Act, I don't know. But I think that they're relying on that the critical mass of leaseholders who will be left will feel that it's not worth their while fighting. Although a few are fighting and are very much opposed to this plan to strip them of their property rights and are working within the Alton Regeneration Watch.
Something that just struck me then when you were saying that was that if they're going to be rehoused, where are they going to be rehoused to? Because the whole of London is being regenerated. So how are they going to go from social housing to social housing which isn't there? That's what the question I'm asking you, really. Is that something that you can answer? I don't know.
Well, that's a big issue,
Yeah.
and that's one that we've been asking about. The process, rather charmingly known as decanting, is a process whereby people are taken from where they live and put into somewhere else. Now, just this last week or so, the first decant sites have been announced, and this includes housing on the site of currently a nursery on the Alton East estate. So the proposal is from Wandsworth Borough Council is that dwellings will be erected there, people will be moved from the demolition zone to there, and in the fullness of time they will either move back or they will stay in the place that they've been decanted to. We've asked many times for details about how this decanting will work and what sort of volume it will be, and given that the demolition and rebuilding is scheduled to take, depending on whom you ask, 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a very lengthy process, and it may be that the ultimately chosen developer will be able to build small, relatively small bunches of residential units as they go and rehouse people in dribs and drabs. But it's going to be an enormously disruptive process. The council has given the undertaking that as far as possible people will be moved only once, but that is not a binding promise. It's an expression of best intentions, and we know what the saying is about what the road to hell is paved with. We've asked the council on many occasions how the phasing for this will work, and the answer always comes back that until the eventual development partner has been chosen and they have unveiled their plans, which will then have to go through the usual planning permission procedures, no answer can be given on this.
Well, that's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
That's because what they're doing, that's a total cop-out. So they're saying that everyone's going to be rehoused, but they're not giving any guarantee of that, and they're not giving any of the conditions that's going to happen in. So that is something that we were talking about with Simon Elmer from Architects for Social Housing, and he was talking about this so-called decanting process. So basically, when you've got Savills who are writing policy with local councils, and you've got local councils selling off council estate land as brownfield sites to developers, then there's no guarantee, as far as I can see, that anyone's going to be rehoused. What do you think about that, just briefly before we go to the break?
It depends what you mean by a guarantee. These are all undertakings given by the council, but we don't understand these to have any contractual enforceable status.
Yes. Okay, well that's good that we've cleared that up. I think a lot of people expect to be rehoused. So that's something to think about, that if you're going to be decanted, there's no guarantee you're going to be decanted, or even where you're going to be decanted to. So we'll see you after the break.
True history is hidden history, manipulated and written by those who believe they are masters of their and our destiny. For those who care to look, the truth can be found. But what of ancient history, religious texts, biblical tales, the movement of people, the movement of the stars, astrological events mapped out over thousands of years? Forthcoming events, predicted and recorded by those who we are told were primitive. Did the Romans really bring new civilization, or was it already here? Britain's history tells of a unique power. Its ancient history, though, is largely unknown. 3,400 years ago, a comet crashes into a historically important landmass. Tales of a flood. But which flood? Where? These stories are repeated in ancient texts. Does history repeat itself? Or is the story merely repackaged? Later, all evidence of its real history is exiled and exported to another land. The timeline of forgotten truth can bring this puzzle together. Britain. We know the power of this small island today, but was Britain the key to important historical events? Events which formed the basis of our religion, beliefs, and ultimately a unique power base whose secrets, as in ancient times, are held by a privileged few. A small priest class holding the knowledge, power, and the key to true reality. This has been the basis of all organized religions, fraternal brotherhoods, and secret societies. Could the stories from over there originate over here?
Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with Robin Bishop from Alton Regeneration Watch, and we're discussing what's happening around London and indeed the whole of the UK. We've just been talking about decanting, which is moving people from where they are to allegedly rehouse them. So welcome back, Robin.
Thanks, Mark. Good to see you again.
Yes. Well, it's a very interesting thing, this, because they're using the same template all over the country, and I think that's what people need to know. That's been exposed in our shows previously. Now, the Alton estate, the one we're referring to today, is in a prime location for redevelopment, and we've just been talking about what's going to happen to the existing leaseholders there, and the promise, or the idea, really, because it's not even a promise, is it, that people are going to be rehoused. Can you just go into what you know about that, this decanting process?
Well, the council's given an undertaking to both leaseholders and secured council tenants that they will be rehoused in like for like in the same area. However, that doesn't mean to say that that is necessarily what's going to happen, because we've already been hearing that people are having their leases already bought by the council. Several sales have already taken place of leases within the demolition zone.
Have you got any idea what sort of prices were offered to people?
As far as we've been able to ascertain from the land registry, pretty much the market price, the prevailing market price. But one of our members also did a very bit of interesting research on council tenants and came up with the finding, very surprising and quite alarming finding, that if you are a council tenant living in the demolition zone, you are 16 times more likely than a council tenant living elsewhere in Wandsworth to be offered council housing outside the area. So this seems to argue that the council is already looking to move secure council tenants out, and by virtue of the fact that they're buying leaseholders out as well, to reduce the number of people who need to be decanted to the minimum. Now, the economic and financial impact of this is that, given that the number of households to be built eventually after the demolition is going to be anything from 800 to 1100 households, dwellings, the more people who live there currently who can be induced to leave the area beforehand, the more new dwellings will be available to the developers to sell on the open market for prices which will be, well, what will they be? We don't know. I've already said that the market price of a 3-bed flat there is about 330,000 for an Alton Estate flat, and that the new flats offered for sale on the edge of the demolition zone is £500,000. Well, it could be that new developments which are nearer to the green heart of the Alton Estate and nearer to being overlooking the vast rolling verdant expanses of Richmond Park will command prices a lot more than £500,000. The block that I'm speaking about, where the 3-bed flats are £500,000, is sandwiched in between I think a doctor's surgery and a motor car repair facility. It's on the main road, Roehampton Lane, and a lot of the views reflect either Roehampton Lane or the car garage. Whereas the demolition zone is surrounded by a plethora of green areas and is much nearer to Richmond Park. And it strikes us that £500,000 for a 3-bed flat in the new development will surely be an understatement of what the developers will be able to get.
So it's quite interesting, this, as to the way people are being impoverished through what's going on. People's aspirations are getting lowered, basically, with as far as property goes. And that's what we've been trying to get over in a lot of these shows. You were talking about people who are going to be decanted and what they were led to expect and what they actually may expect. So you made a very good point about these flats that are being, the regeneration area is prime real estate. We've already talked about that. The Alton Estate is overlooking Richmond Park. Is that right? Yeah?
It is indeed.
Yeah, and it's a very green area. So your point was that those flats are going to go a lot more, they're going to be a lot more expensive than the council are actually saying. And the people who are going to be decanted will be decanted in an area where there's not going to be any view, and it's no guarantee that they're even going to be decanted. Can you go into that a bit more?
Yes, the council has given undertakings to both leaseholders and assured tenants, and it's hard to see that they will be able to wriggle out of that. But then things always change, don't they? Nothing remains the same, and the council, in the fullness of time, may have to claim that because of Brexit and various economic consequences of that, everything that was planned for is unfortunately now unable to be realised, and it's beyond their control. And it's hard to see that in a court of law, anybody is going to be able to say that they have a contractual arrangement with the council which can be enforced.
That is the key point. Whether there's a contract that's enforceable with what they're saying. And of course, yes, well, you know, the reason we can't go back to the moon is because of Brexit. You know, there's so many things that have been brought up that are beyond ridiculous, and we're living in an age where we dealt with this before a lot on the show. Change agents, there's culture of change agents going in, manipulating public opinion, manipulating apparent public opinion, and the takeover of basically everything from local media to mainstream media. People don't seem to have a say. So are people not at all worried about that?
It doesn't seem, Mark, that they are, not terribly.
Right.
Social tenants, I think, council tenants by and large, are relying on the council, I think, to rehouse them. And if they do have worries about that, they, I think, say by and large, well, whatever the council wants, the council gets. Now, leaseholders, though, there is a lot more concern amongst them. But it's my guess that some of them who are already in the Alton Regeneration Watch, whose mission statement is to ensure that the regeneration serves the interests of the community, they're already in the Alton Regeneration Watch, and they are fighting for their rights and trying to get people galvanised so that nobody is sold down the river. However, other leaseholders, I'm sure, are taking a more individualistic path and choosing to sell their leaseholds now. And they will just be saying, well, far better if I'm off out of it. Nothing can go wrong if I bought a new place somewhere else that's not being redeveloped. So I think probably that those who are most able to move, those who have the most money, will probably be moving and will not really care about who's left.
Yeah, I think people are in for a bit of a shock here, because I'm hearing reports that people are being decanted hundreds of miles from where they thought they were going to be canted, you know.
Indeed. Well, as I say, Wandsworth Borough Council has given fairly public assurances that this will not happen, but that remains to be seen. It remains to be seen how that pans out in practice, because we've taken a lot of heed in the Alton Regeneration Watch of what has happened on the West Hendon estate in Barnet Council's area, and the council there appears to have made a lot of promises to residents before the regeneration of that estate that not only were not kept to in fact, but the residents seem to have very little recourse to the law. There doesn't seem to be anything solid there for them to force the council to adhere to the promises that it gave before the regeneration.
That's really what I wanted to bring up next, and where I want this to go, because we're going to have to sort of seek some kind of remedy here. And you've been working on this for a long time, so we're going to have a short break in a minute. But just before we do that, can you just tell us a bit about your involvement with this campaign and roughly where it is now?
Our campaign started a bit over 2 years ago and proceeded as a closed group until we were ready in May of last year to hold the first of our regular monthly public meetings, since which time we've attracted, I would say, 60 members. The situation is that we have reached a certain impasse in that we're not gaining more members now, because we think that some leaseholders, as I've said, have probably elected already to leave the district, and that social tenants who have never formed a large part of our membership are satisfied with the council's assurances. Either that, or they feel powerless to resist.
So you've been giving them a platform and working away, and it's really apathy that's the problem. You think?
Partly, I think, Mark, it's apathy, but partly also, I think, the feeling that Wandsworth Borough Council, which is, let us not forget, the flagship Tory borough that first introduced outsourcing of services such as rubbish collection in the very early 80s, the feeling is that this council is unstoppable. It's been a solid Tory borough, and as I say, the flagship borough for neoconservative policies for such a long time that it feels absolutely derailable.
Yeah, but it doesn't really matter whether it's Tories or New Labour. They're both really the same party with the same agendas. So I think people get a bit misled there, because we've been covering this in many shows, and the agenda that's going on seems unstoppable because it's happening so quickly. We're going to have a short break, and we're going to be back after the break with Piers Corbyn. Welcome back to Windows on the World. We've been talking to Robin Bishop from the Alton Regeneration Watch and talking about the Alton estate and what's happening. This is mirrored all over the country. But just before we go and introduce Piers Corbyn into the conversation, this is from today's Evening Standard. It says here, quite laughably, London property market grinds to a Brexit standstill. The rapidly cooling London property market ground to a complete halt in the run-up to the EU referendum, and has started to slide since last month's shock vote for Brexit. Two surveys suggest today. I wonder who did the surveys. Below that it says Bank of England calls vote a profound shock to the economy. Britain has suffered a profound shock to the economy from the Brexit vote. A senior member of the Bank of England stressed today as he rejected accusations of scaremongering. It was very strange that the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, said it hadn't make any bloody difference at all. So Piers Corbyn, welcome to the show.
Welcome, yes.
In part 3 of the show.
Okay.
Yes,
It's
we
good
are
to
now
be
going to talk about possible solutions, because we've talked about this in many shows, all remedies being taken away, and the public are really being treated with, well, beneath contempt really, by what's going on. We've talked about judicial reviews being ignored by councils. This was the Cressingham Gardens.
Yep.
And people were just outraged at that. And of course, this agenda is not going to stop. And you were talking just before the break, Robin, about a judicial review with the Alton regeneration plan. Can you tell us a bit about that?
The idea there, Mark, was that the supplementary planning document, which was adopted by the council in October 2015, and in fact they even announced in September that it would be adopted in October, even before they'd voted on it. Sorry.
That's all right. Even before they voted on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
The document announcing that the SPD, the supplementary planning document, had been adopted was available on the council website before they had even voted in September to adopt it. This was only the most obvious failing of the whole so-called consultation process, which took place prior to the supplementary planning document's final adoption. We had 2 sets of public consultations, allegedly, during the course of the master planning process, and a third one during the consideration of the supplementary planning document. As an example of just how cogent the case was for the demolition of the 330 households in the demolition zone, of the 3,800 questionnaires which were sent out to the estate on 2 separate occasions during the master planning process, around 250 were completed and returned at the time. Yet the council asserted that this lamentable response rate was sufficient for them to be satisfied that the number of people proposing that the council should go ahead with the maximum demolition and rebuilding of the area should go ahead. But even within those 250 odd responses each time, the amount of enthusiasm for demolition seemed to any outside observer minimal. The supplementary planning document itself contains so many inaccuracies that many in the ARW and outside it felt that it was not a reliable document, both mainly factually speaking. It was insufficient for the council to claim that it had a mandate to continue with the demolition on. And we did attempt to, we did in fact approach a solicitor with an eye to calling for a judicial review, but it seemed that the consultation process, which consisted of the questionnaires I've referred to, plus doorstepping by council officials in and around the demolition area, all of this had made it too hard a case for the solicitors to take on, and as a result we ran out of time to appeal for a judicial review of the adoption of the supplementary planning document, and the council steamrolled on regardless.
Yeah, this is the same all over the country. I'm hearing this same story. And also there's members of the legal profession who were appointed to defend the public's position, and then they find that the hearing's actually held in private and they've been completely stitched up. And there's one case where this happened in North London that I'm well versed in. The councils have this new agenda, which is they put things out as though there's a consultation. Nobody seems to even get the forms, and then they announce that 65% of people are in favour of what they're doing, but on the street no one's agreed to it. This, for instance, Transport for London injected a lot of money into so-called mini Holland schemes, which is a big part of what we're talking about today, and if people don't get the connection, they need to look into that. City villages, etc., and what that's really about, so-called regeneration. But in that case, the local authority had already made up their mind with Transport for London what the public were going to think, because it was announced that 65% of people were in favour of this scheme when it hadn't even been piloted. So that's the level of deception that we're up against. So, Piers.
Yes.
Have you got any idea what we could do next here? Because you've given some, what a lot of people go, radical ideas about, you know.
Housing for all, things like that.
Yeah, but basically people standing up for their own rights, radical ideas like that.
Yes.
Where
Well,
can we go from here?
I think all these developments have in common that the councils and the developers work together to steamroller whatever they want, and they draw up an agenda and they decide things before the consultations and so forth. However, from experience, they can be stopped providing we organise and get clear what it's about. But bear in mind, they have basically all of these things have got a common sort of agenda in detail, more or less in detail. First of all, they have a consultation, which is actually a selling exercise. The consultation is there to brainwash people. And they use that to weaken communities, not strengthen them. When they talk about empowerment, they're talking about taking certain people out and putting stooges in. They will try divide and rule, the tenants against the leaseholders against people living, fronts of buildings, backs of buildings, anything to divide and rule. And they will, when it comes to the supposed choosing, take away options. Like they hid or lied about the validity of refurbishment as opposed to demolition on the Cressingham Gardens, on the Aylesbury estate, and they're doing the same on the Alton estate. But I would say, in a sort of background, what you said about Brexit and supposed reduction in property values is interesting, because there may be some truth in it. Although, of course, basically anything they say about Brexit is a scaremongering in order to justify not actually leaving the EU or smudging over the things.
Well, in the same corner of the paper, in the right-hand corner where your eye goes to after this stuff, written this, it says here, "Million Remainers to march for unity."
Well, it's nonsense. Look, George Osborne told us in certain terms that if we go for Brexit, there'll be such chaos they're going to have to impose £30 billion of cuts immediately. Well, on day one, he stood up and announced, "Oh, we're not going to do that budget after all." And the Bank of England said, "Oh, it's okay, steady as she goes." Now, the fact is that a lot of countries have approached Britain and said, "Oh, you're going to be out. Well, okay, we'll do a trade arrangement with you," which doesn't involve anything about free movement of people. It's about good movement of goods. So, you know, what people want can happen. But I just want to say that the point about that reduction in property speculation values is significant, because the driving force for what's happening on the Alton, the Aylesbury, Cressingham Gardens, Central Hill, Lambeth, is the plunder of land by basically international thieves who want to launder money in London and other cities. Now, if the driving force for that goes down, it means there will be less pressure. And it's also already the case, it seems, that the luxury flats that have been built are not moving as fast as they wanted. So the whole thing could actually crash. And, you know, we might find that we're doing things when actually the powers that be are dropping back. You see, on the Aylesbury now, there was that inquiry into the compulsory purchase order of the owner-occupiers, or leaseholders rather, and that still hasn't reported. So by us doing things, the whole plan has got way back. Now this is going to, if it carries on like this, it's going to be gone so slow that Notting Hill Housing Trust are going to say, well, you know, this ain't worth it anymore, you know, and they're going to want to pull out. So there's anything we can do will affect them. Now, just about the point on how to change this apathy, which, you know, happens, I think it's worth noticing that on the Aylesbury estate, when people started off campaigning, they weren't sure what they wanted. They knew that maybe it's not right, them trying to move us, but a lot of people believed it was going to be good. They were promised houses with gardens, stuff like that. And we started a campaign there, or the people did, and they asked me to join it, called Worried About Tenancy Transfer. And then people started realising, no, actually it's bad, and then it was working against tenancy transfer. And it was called WATT after James Watt, because the ward there is called Faraday Ward after Michael Faraday, who lived there. So it was all a bit of fun, but you know. Then we changed the opinion on the estate by putting forward a clear message. We pointed out to people that if you look, basically the most important thing you've got is your council secure tenancy, and if they offer you anything else, you're going to be less secure. So anything they offer about reducing security is bad. And the second thing we pointed out is that any plan they draw up is not a definitive plan, because when the properties are handed over to a housing association, or even if they're not, any plan is just regarded as, oh, that was an indicative plan. Anything could happen. And when people realised, oh my God, we could have 3 tower blocks, not 1, or I mean tower blocks for rich people, that is, and so forth, what they've told us isn't guaranteed anyway, then people realise that the best thing they can do is stay with the whole estate as on council. And we had a massive vote on that. 73% voted to stay, and 15% only voted to in support of the transfer, and the rest were abstentions. Now, we know after that the council lied and lied and lied and lied and lied, along with the government, in order to reverse that. But they're still in a kind of stalemate, because they've demolished 25%, 75% are still there, and we're carrying on. And this started under Tony Blair in 1997. Well, where are we now? Next year's 2017. This is 20 years later.
Yeah.
Okay. And they thought it'd all be done in 5 years. So, and I think on the Alton estate, we have to again sort of be bold and get across to people, because really, given the situation of pollution in London, what Wandsworth Council wants to do is basically kill you They want to kill everybody there. They want to kill their community and move people out in a way which will shorten their lives by about 6 years. Because that is a fact. The Alton Estate is such fantastic clean air, which is why the powers that be really want it.
We've already talked about this and we've
Clean
made that
air.
point. Yeah.
Greenery all around. I mean, you know, the various money laundering operations around the world are going to really want that. They really want it overlooking Richmond Park on the southwest of London, with the cleanest air in London coming in from the Atlantic on a good day, or the English Channel certainly. So they certainly want that. So we point out the council wants to kill you and your community, and your tenancy, your council secure tenancy, is solid gold, and you've got to keep it. Anything involving leaving that particular tenancy is going to weaken your case, and you'll end up being shoved somewhere where you don't want to be. And bear in mind that every undertaking by the council is worth not a light. It doesn't mean anything at all. They can write what they want, promise what they want in public, like they did on the Aylesbury, and then they say, oh, we've changed our minds. That was done by those previous councillors. Dear me, we can't be bound by them. No. And, you know, the council in front of you will decide something and it'll be gone in 5 years, but you won't be. So, you know, the only thing, as I say, is to carry on to, you know, keep everything you've got. And you want slogans which will unite people from outside as well. Basically, no evictions, keep all council housing, campaign for decent housing for all, and point out that if we can keep down rents and maintain rights on council properties, then the same follows in private rented. And you know, because once the council first defence has gone, then private rented will go up, mortgages go up, house values go up, and so on, and we've got to stop that. Rising house prices is not a good thing, it's a bad thing. We want property at cost, actually. We want housing at cost. We have transport more or less at cost, we should have housing at cost. I mean, this is just common sense.
Absolutely. And the only people who wouldn't agree with what you're saying are the Bank of England and the City of London. But, so really, I suppose the message is not to believe anything you're told now by local authorities. They cannot be trusted. They're run by change agents. This culture's gone all over the country. It's not just in your local community, because we've been through several local communities, even on this show.
Do not trust them.
Do not trust them. And do not believe anything you read in these. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.